Order. Dr Matthew Offord to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Noakes. I beg to move that this House has considered security in Nigeria. Indeed, Ms Noakes, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to see so many valuable colleagues here today. In October of this year, Nigeria will celebrate its 67th year of independence. In those 6 decades, the country has experienced civil war, alternating periods of military and civilian rule, and in 2015, its first peaceful transfer of power. That progression should have laid a foundation for continuing success. But Nigeria is at a crossroads. As Aya Adedoyin, the CEO of the International Organization for Peace, Building and Social Justice, who is here in the public gallery today, has said, Nigerians are a very resilient people. However, it is that very same virtue which explains why the nation's insecurity crisis is not yet such a national and international issue. Words I certainly agree with. It is known that almost half the population would actually like to leave the country. The reasons for this will be wide and diverse, but there are underlying conditions that apply to every single person who lives in the country and is a member of the nation. Nigeria is home to one of the world's largest populations living in extreme poverty. It has become synonymous with political inertia and corruption, widespread insecurity, and a loss of public confidence in its politicians. But worst of all is the increasing death toll. Last year alone, 1,000 people were killed in violent terrorist incidents, and the death of Boko Haram's leader at the hands of Islamist rivals has brought further insecurity. It is no exaggeration to say that Nigeria's security situation has now reached crisis levels, and in the next few minutes, I will outline 6 issues that have not only caused the situation, but are perpetuating it. These are Islamic extremism, kidnappings for ransom, intercommunal and religiously motivated violence, human trafficking, electoral violence, and extreme poverty. There can be little doubt that the Nigerian security crisis is having a calamitous economic impact, deterring foreign investment and undermining prospectus for economic growth that will result in a regional crisis in the future. I'll start with the first of these issues. Violence perpetuated by Islamic extremists has increased, with Islamic State's West African province, ISWAP, surpassing Boko Haram as the most deadly terrorist organisation in the province. ISWAP is believed to have recruited as many as 5,000 militias into its ranks, compared with Boko Haram's one-time strength of around 2,000 men. This new organisation emerged after a division of loyalty from the leadership of Boko Haram, with ISWAP founder Abu Musab al-Nawawi, the eldest son of Muhammad Yusuf, a former Boko Haram spokesman, declaring allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, rather than the former leader of Boko Haram, Abu Shakir al-Baghdadi, who was killed last year by ISWAP. The group has focused its activities against state targets, which has resulted in the reduction of the military police and security services capability. Their attacks have demonstrated a level of tactical and strategic attitude, with ISWAP combatants better armed and trained than their predecessors. And there are unconfirmed reports that many are heard to speak Arabic instead of Hausa, indicating a growing participation and influence of extremists from the Sahel and beyond. This decision to reduce attacks upon civilian targets has resulted in rising public support for the group, resulting in a government intervention which began in 2013 in 3 states, having to widen its remit across several territories in northern Nigeria. In the last 12 months, Nigeria has also seen a large rise in kidnappings for ransom. In the first 9 months of last year, some 2,200 people were kidnapped for ransom, more than double the number abducted the year before. Many that occur are in the northeastern states and are perpetuated by Islamic extremists, but others have been conducted by groups widely characterized as bandits, and sometimes this is in conjunction with the extremists. But the motivation remains financial gain. Both violence conducted by Islamic extremists was highest in the state of Borno, but last year more Nigerians were killed by criminal gangs in the northwest than by jihadists in the northeast. Now, for many years, there has been conflict in the Middle Belt region that illustrates social divisions in Nigeria. In 2 decades, more than 17,000 people are believed to have been killed in the region, and over 10,000 people have fled their homes. This violence receives scarce media attention, particularly in the West. But where it does, it is attributed to disputes between farmers and herders for resources. It is undoubtedly true that in the last 10 years, 60% of Nigerian territory has been characterised with some form of desertification, reducing land available for agricultural production through a decline in the water supply. Fulani herdsmen traditionally migrated through pasture lands in the Middle Belt region. These geographical conditions now require a greater migration further south, which brings them into conflict with settled farms. The Fulani herders come from a nomadic, predominantly Muslim tribe, but greater numbers of people in the south are practicing Christians. This ensures that public opinion within Nigeria increasingly characterises the conflict as a geographical one between the country's two dominant religions, Christians in the south and Muslims in the north. And this is reinforced by the fact that Fulani militia target non-Muslim communities, particularly Christians. In the last decade, more than 500 churches in the Benue state have been destroyed by Fulani militia, while in just 1 year, in 2014, more than 100 churches were destroyed in the Taraba state, with another 200 abandoned through fear of attack. In October of last year, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom raised concerns over a spate of lethal attacks against Christian communities in Kano and Kaduna. Central Nigeria is known as the breadbasket of the nation. But because farmers are being killed in their fields, they're afraid to go out to work. With nobody to tend their crops, they fail, contributing to a greater food shortage in the country. Human trafficking also ranks as the third most common crime in Nigeria after drug trafficking and economic fraud. It is estimated that up to 1 million people are trafficked annually, with 98% moving internally. The Organisation for Migration estimates that there are at least 1.4 million continuing victims of human trafficking living within Nigerian borders. Most victims are vulnerable to sexual exploitation and forced labour. Over the past 3 decades, an estimated 30,000 Nigerian women have been forced into prostitution here in Europe, with more than 85% originating from just one state, Edo. Migrants are typically unable to afford to pay the price of their transit and are forced to enter into servitude. This ensures an indefinite period of effective slavery or sexual exploitation, often reinforced by the use of the revered juju rituals that compare those subjected to trafficking to comply with their traffickers. These rites are used to intimidate people from reporting their trafficking and ensures their compliance. Finally, elections. Nigeria has a long history of electoral violence. In the last 20 years, since returning to civilian rule, Nigeria has held 16 elections, all of which have been marred by violence and bloodshed. In 2003, 100 people were killed. In 2007, 300 people were killed. But the worst election-related violence occurred in the 3 days after the 2011 election, with over 800 fatalities, with 700 killed in Kaduna alone. And next February, we'll see the country's next general election. It is estimated that 87 million of Nigerians, around 40% of the country, live on less than $1.19 a day. The country desperately needs to provide economic opportunity for a rapidly growing population. The UN projects that Nigeria's population will almost double by 2050, reaching an estimated 400 million people. Job creation has failed to keep pace with the country's high birth rate. This ensures that many people, especially the young, become highly vulnerable to manipulation by extremists and criminal networks. Now, it's not the role of the United Kingdom government to enter Nigeria and to provide military aid, but as a Commonwealth country, we have a duty to assist our friends. In addition, the Minister, who is in her place, recently responded to my written question and advised that the official development agency bilateral spend in Nigeria last year was over £100 million. So we have a lot invested in the country, and to stand back and watch it become a province of Daesh is unacceptable. I'm aware that the UK government is supporting Nigeria to respond to the increasing conflict by supporting in itself regional stabilisation and increasing interagency cooperation, delivering training to tackle terrorist financing, and in defection, demobilisation, disengagement and de-radicalisation processes, which all provide a genuine pathway for members of violent extremist organisations to defect and to reintegrate into their communities and their families. Only in February, the bilateral security and defence dialogue witnessed the UK's commitment to support Nigeria as it responds to these security challenges. However, it would now be appropriate to review what political, diplomatic and military support the UK can offer the people of Nigeria. So I ask the Minister to consider reviewing the ODA to allow spending to be focused on non-lethal security cooperation measures. It's no use providing money, Minister, to ensure girls can access education if terrorists are kidnapping those very same children. After the elections next year, the Nigerian government should convene an international summit to outline specific actions they intend to make and to make requests of the international community for material development and technical support. If a proactive action plan is not made and implemented, the tentacles of Daesh will have extended into and found a base on the African mainland that will allow terror attacks to occur across Africa and into mainland Europe. We need to draw a line to stop Nigeria becoming a failed state. We need to draw a line to stop a regional conflict becoming an international one. And we need to draw a line to protect the peoples of the Commonwealth. And that line is Nigeria. Thank you, Ms. Snokes.
The question is that this House has considered the security situation in Nigeria. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Member for Hendon for securing this debate and for setting the scene so very, very well. In the current interest as a chair of the APPG for freedom of religious belief, because ultimately, as an APPG, we speak up for those with Christian faith, those with other faiths, and those with no faith. And in a way, not in a way, in reality, Nigeria encompasses all of those three things in totality. And Nigeria is a topic very close to my heart, as many will know. I've had the privilege of visiting Nigeria about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and during my time as chair of the APPG for International Freedom of Religion or Belief. That visit took place in late May. In Nigeria, we met people of Christian faith who had been displaced. We met those of Muslim faith who had been displaced. And we met some of those who are humanists and who have no faith at all. So we took that opportunity to interact with all of them. I was very pleased to see the shadow spokesperson, the Honourable Member for Argyll and Bute, who's here, and he and I were part of that deputation. So just, I'll be mindful when we come home, and I see the Minister in her place, and the Minister was able to respond to a Nigerian question, UQ, or statement just shortly after we came back. I think it was to do with the murder of the Christians. And it was hard for us to believe, Madam Chair, that we came home on a Thursday, I think it was, and on the Sunday, there was an attack, an absolute terrible, horrific attack upon Christians worshipping in their church, where 40 were murdered, men, women and children. I think if we needed any reminding, that sort of brought it back to us with great forcefulness of what it means to be a Christian in Nigeria. During that recent visit, I was able to speak through the APP and through the deputation to people who had suffered the most horrific consequences of the deteriorating security situation in Nigeria firsthand. They shared stories of unimaginable violence, intimidation, family members murdered, members mutilated, ladies, women and children who were subject to all sorts of abuse, property stolen, lost their education, lost their opportunities, lost their jobs, and were in the internally displaced camps, of which we visited one in particular, where both Christians and Muslims were there, and they've been there for 8 and 9 years. I find it quite hard to take that occasion, to be honest, Madam Chair. It was one that left a lasting impression upon myself and upon others, because there was many who just wanted to do something, who wanted to achieve something in their life, but in a way they were in a displaced camp, and when they got there, they seemed to be forgotten about in that if they were there and you set them down food and water, then that was okay, but it's not okay, because what they need is to be taught in education. We went with an organisation, a charity called Bellwether International. They provided finances so we were able to take down some food to them, also to take down some things for the children for education. But within that camp, and what I know the Honourable Gentleman for Argyll and Bute will be moved by, as I was, We had some people who were trying to provide education for the young people in that camp. Others were trying to find job opportunities. Others had the very much rudimentary a medical centre, which was very much rudimentary. To be honest with you, Madam Chair, it was like your garden share that had fallen into disrepair and over a number of years. But the thing was, there were people trying to do something. But what we need to do, and what I hope that we can do through our minister and through our government, is to reach out to those NGOs, reach out to those people, and give that opportunity, that hope, that vision that they need, and which we seen through the eyes of those who were there. On many occasions, Madam Chair, you met people and you didn't actually have to ask them what their stories were. You just had to look at their eyes. Their eyes told you their story. Their stories were stories of pain, of agony, and so on. And all those stories were made all the more bitter and unjust due to the lack of impunity and inaction on the part of the Nigerian government. 3 million people have been displaced in Nigeria. We met some of them, from the academics to the NGO workers to the victims. Many of the people I met with in Nigeria shared concerns about impunity for the ongoing violence, where the army and the police on many occasions just stood aside and didn't do anything. So there needs to be a strong arm issue in relation to dealing with terrorism, and the army and government needs to push that very hard. Just one example I heard of that I quoted was that the federal government built a local primary school in Benue region and named the school after a Fulani chief, in an area where numerous Fulani attacks had resulted in the murder of many people. If that wasn't spitting in your eye, I'd like to know what was. But again, it shows that that government in Nigeria seems to be out of touch and seems to have an unwillingness or uncertainty when it comes to helping. The level of impunity was heightened in recent years as the violence in Nigeria increases and spills into southern states, which were previously considered safe. We had hoped to visit northeast Nigeria, but that wasn't possible because of the security situation. But what we did do, Madam Chair, was we brought them people down in planes down to Abuja, and we met the church leaders, the community leaders, and were able to hear their stories and try to help out. Buhari's positioning of Muslims in senior government roles also makes it even more difficult for Christians and other minorities to speak out, thereby perpetuating a culture of impunity and a sense of being left behind. It's so sad to see a country of the magnitude of Nigeria, with a population of 200 million, with great potential, great reserves, great economic opportunities, and yet in all lagging behind in the world's watch list. Nigeria is number 7 in the Open Doors World Watch List. That means it's the 7th worst country in the world to be a Christian, with Christians facing severe levels of persecution. The situation in the middle belt of the country is particularly concerning. Violence in the middle belt has become one of Nigeria's most serious security challenges, reportedly 6 times deadlier than Boko Haram in 2018. Fulani militant violence has displaced hundreds of thousands of Christians and intensified religious and ethnic divisions in the country. I think my honourable friend for Argyll said that everything in Nigeria seems to be measured by your religious status, which tells us that everything is coming from that thrust, and that's where we need to address. But this is not only true for Christians, but those of other beliefs too, for Muslims, for those of ethnic groups. Connected to Nigeria, we also heard from Leo Igwe, founder of the Humanist Association of Nigeria. And due to the extremely precarious situation of humanists in Nigeria, Igwe told me and told us all that they do not always know where the humanists are in Nigeria, and trying to get in contact with fellow humanists poses a serious threat. And I know that we, as an APPG and as a delegation, made contact with one of the people, Mubarak. I think it was in prison for some 24 years, a humanist. And we did feel that government was making some steps in the right direction. And maybe if the minister is able to probably reassure us in that, I'd be very, very happy. We'll all be happy. I'd like to just conclude, Madam Chair, by sharing the remarks of a Boko Haram survivor, Martha, a Christian from Koza, Borneo State, who told me and told the delegation, sometime in 2014 we were home when information reached us that a group of armed men were attacking houses and killing men in our village. My family, including her, and I tried escaping when my father-in-law and husband were caught by the Boko Haram men. The two were murdered, while my life and that of my 8 children were spared. While it is a blessing, Madam Chair, that Martha managed to survive, 8 years later, this lady is still in the IDP camp and has no stable source of income. And not too far from the IDP camp where we were, they had identified a portion of land where the farmers, because they were farmers, and they could have farmed that land and produced the good and give them a reason for getting up in the morning and to become sustainable. So there are things that can be done. But if the security situation is not improved and attacks by extremist groups are not prevented, more people will face this devastating situation. We were aware of attacks in the southwest of Nigeria, in the middle belt where we were as well. So I hope, Madam Chair, that this debate goes some way to communicating the gravity of the situation to our government and to our minister, so that they will do what they can to ensure that no one else has to suffer in such a way. The Nigerian authorities, the High Commissioners, those in civil service positions within government, we met them and we impressed upon them very, very strongly that the one thing that they have to address, first of all, is the security situation. Address the security situation, prevent terrorism, and let people who wish to live together, who have lived together, that they can do that. I know Northern Ireland, and I use it as an example, Madam Chair, because I lived there for many years and still do, where the two communities were at each other's throats for a long, long time. And then both communities realised to go forward, we had to come together. But to make that happen, the first thing you have to do is provide security and do away with terrorism. So I suggest that the first thing for the Nigerian government to do is to address the terrorism issue in Nigeria. Madam Chair, thank you.
The front bench spokesman will come to you by 17:45 at the latest. Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve in your chairmanship and indeed to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford in this debate. He's always so faithful in his commitment to these debates. And I do want to commend the Honourable Member for Hendon for securing this debate and for his excellent speech. And I look forward to the Minister's responses to his incisive questions. There was a tale of two speeches at the International Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief here in London 2 weeks ago. First, in her keynote speech introducing the conference, the Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Liz Truss MP, commendably called out the atrocity...
Names. Thank you.
Thank you. Commendably called out the atrocity in Nigeria last month when over 40 people were killed simply for being in a Catholic church in Ondo State celebrating Pentecost. But this was no isolated incident, because on the same day of 5th June, there were reports from Kajura, South Kaduna, of Fulani bandits attacking the indigenous Adara people, aided by an Air Force helicopter, killing 32 and destroying an ECWA church, the Evangelical Church winning all. Not a single terrorist was killed. 32 members of that church were. And the following Sunday, June the 12th, further reports of approximately 50 Catholics killed just before morning mass in Agbogona in Benue State, north-central Nigeria. So, in 1 week alone, over 120 innocent civilians were slaughtered in northwest, north-central and southwest Nigeria. I will.
One of the things that was in my mind, I should have said it earlier, and apologies for not doing so, was the example where an attack was taking place in a town and there was an army barracks not too far away. The army barracks did not respond to the attack that was happening outside the very, very gate because the army themselves were waiting in the OK from their superior officers. So does the Honourable Lady agree that to address one of the major issues in Nigeria, it has to be addressing the terrorism on the ground? By addressing that, only then can the local community get back to living a normal lifestyle in peace.
Indeed, it has to be addressed on the ground, because it is heart-rending that night after night people are going to bed at night fearful of whether they will ever wake up. The International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law in April 2022 noted that 4,650 Christians were killed in Nigeria between November 2020 and October 2021, higher than the 3,530 deaths recorded in the previous year, October 2019 to November 2020, and that 2,500 Christians were abducted between November 2020 and October 2021, as against 900 the previous year. Now, the Minister will no doubt be keen to throw something of a contextual blanket, a contextual narrative on my emphasis of religious-based violence and religious targeting of mainly Christian victims. She will also likely note that religious identity can be a factor in incidents of violence in Nigeria, and that Christian communities have been victims, but emphasise that root causes are often complex and frequently also relate to competition over resources, historical resources, and criminality. And the Minister may also factor in the pressing challenges of climate change and global food shortages. But I would ask the Minister to interrogate the repeated number of attacks going on in the central region of Nigeria and indeed the northwest, which are executed and coordinated by well-organised and well-funded groups, the Fulani Islamist militia groups, as well as other terrorist groups in Ansaru in Kaduna State. The appalling atrocities using sophisticated equipment, including a helicopter, by these perpetrators cannot simply be characterised as atrocities by local bandits, and the killings going on, such as last month, were not simply a clash between farmers and herders. Much attention is given to the security challenges in northeast Nigeria, rather than the central parts of Nigeria experiencing these devastating attacks. Many villages have been destroyed and thousands of people are displaced. Some reports say that the Fulani Islamist groups have killed more people than Boko Haram in the last 2 years and are more vicious in executing their atrocities. Efforts to rightly avoid simple descriptors of Nigeria's insecurity as a religious conflict should not, though, fail to properly diagnose the security situation facing Nigerians who get in the way of Islamist militants. The Minister will rightly reference that of the deaths of nearly 350,000 Nigerians by Islamic insurgencies, they do include a large number of Muslim victims, as well as indigenous beliefs and humanists and Christians. As the Foreign Secretary recognised 2 weeks ago, these are grievous violations of the right to freedom of religion or belief, a right which should be available for everyone, everywhere. A universal right which only 10 days ago brought over 1,000 delegates from 100 countries together for the London Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief. But a country representative at that conference who sadly does not truly get what is happening in Nigeria is Nigeria. So the second speech I wish to draw the House's attention to today is that of the Nigerian High Commissioner to the UK, who on the one hand pledged to uphold FORB without hindrance and as guaranteed in Nigeria's constitution, but then declared that insecurity has nothing to do with religion, refusing to recognise religious-based and targeted violence. Sadly, this is a speech which risks perpetuating impunity for religiously motivated violence across Nigeria. It means that when the young student, Deborah Samuel, was horrifically lynched in Sokoto on May 22nd this year, having been accused of blasphemy, and it was rightly condemned across religious leaders, no one has been held accountable for the severity of that crime. It's why there are reports of security services being at best absent and at worst complicit in violence perpetrated by militants. In conclusion, can I ask the Minister, rather than follow the line of the Nigerian government when it comes to security and freedom of religion or belief, that she follows the recommendation of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report from April 2022, which stated, the integrated delivery plan should include concrete steps for how the UK government will support the Nigerian government in promoting freedom of religion and belief, as well as preventing violence against women and girls across their engagement activities in Nigeria.
People, Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Ms. Noakes. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair for this afternoon's debate. And I'd like to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Hendon for the really thoughtful and considered way that he opened this debate, and for all the contributions that we've had. I think it's been a really useful and worthwhile exercise. And as my honourable friend from Strangford said, this is timely and important because this is critical. This is a crucial time for Nigeria. And we visited Nigeria just a few weeks ago with Baroness Cox as part of the APPG on freedom of religion or belief. And the purpose was to follow up on the 2020 visit from the APPG and to see what had been done in response to the report Nigeria Unfolding Genocide, which had concluded that Christians were experiencing mass atrocities and violent acts, including killings, kidnappings and the destruction of their property. And as we've heard, it was a challenging visit, particularly because we were unable to travel beyond the city limits of Abuja, and those who wished to speak to us had to travel vast distances to do so. But such was their desire that they did come, and they came from Sokoto, Kaduna, Jos, Maiduguri, Lagos, everywhere. They came to ensure that the UK and the UK politicians didn't forget about Nigeria and understood and accepted the historical and colonial responsibility that this country has for that beautiful state. And what was striking was that no matter where they came from and irrespective of their religion, the stories were similar, because it was all about endemic corruption, a lack of security, a culture of impunity, an absence of meaningful civil society, and extreme poverty coupled to the emergence of radical Islam that has seen Nigeria at a tipping point, and one that could descend into chaos and civil war if nothing is done to address it. At one of our meetings, we spoke to Rebecca and Khadija, two women who devoted their lives to building peace and bringing justice to their community. And their assessment was so simple. They said, the government is totally oblivious to our reality. Politicians have nothing to offer except division, and people, particularly the young, have been left without hope, and that is one of the major drivers. That exclusion is one of the major drivers of the conflict. And as other members for Hendon and Strangford and Congleton have said about the escalation of violence, yes, of course, there are religious leaders who are doing their very best, but because of rampant government corruption, people have lost faith. They have lost faith in those institutions which should be there to protect them, and as a result, far too many of them now follow the voice of the cleric, no matter how radical that clerical voice is, because that is the voice that has replaced the government as the voice of authority. And in a country where everything is seen through the prism of religion, it's almost inevitable that that conflict, religious violence, will follow. And I recall one person that we spoke to who made the very shrewd observation about his homeland, that in Nigeria, there's a big increase in ostentatious displays of faith. The prayers are louder, the churches and the mosques are fuller, but there's less God. And he concluded that religion is not what you do, it's about how you treat others, and how true that statement is. There's a tipping point that we're almost there. And I think that next year, 2023, when the presidential elections come, is absolutely pivotal for the future of Nigeria. Both sides have chosen their candidates, and we have a responsibility to ensure that that election is free and fair and is peaceful. And regardless of the result, we have to support that new government. But could I ask the Minister, what plans have been put in place by the government now ahead of those elections? Because the clock is ticking. And Nigeria needs real, meaningful change. And unless Nigeria is transformed quickly, it will be too late. And that nightmare scenario of a religious-based violence descending into civil war could become a reality. And the consequences for Africa, the consequences for Europe, the consequences for us are unthinkable should that happen. And I'd ask the Minister to think seriously about what this government can do to support Nigeria in avoiding that catastrophic end.
Thank you, Ms Noakes. Ms Noakes, it's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank the Honourable Member for Hendon for bringing this debate and all those who have spoken today. The potential of the people of Nigeria to shape our world for the better is enormous. But that potential is being shattered by terrible violence with increasing frequency and scale. The fear and chaos even risk the political stability of Nigeria, one of the most important partner countries for us. Many of us represent wonderful Nigerian diaspora communities, so we have a really vivid sense of these links and the benefits that's on offer. But at the same time, we hear increasing concern from constituents worried about the safety of their families and terrified for the beautiful country which they love. And we've heard about some of the atrocities that have been perpetrated on the people of Nigeria, and perhaps the worst attack of all was in Owo in 5th of June, which has taken the lives of 41 churchgoers to date, with 17 still in hospital. And I want to reiterate the Labour Party's solidarity with the victims, their families and their communities. As colleagues have mentioned, there have been other targeted attacks on religious sites and leaders, and we need to see this all in the context of wider conflicts and violations of religious freedoms for Christian denominations and for others. In January, there were 571 instances of kidnapping and 314 killings of people reported in Nigeria. The majority were in the northwest, particularly at Niger and the Zamfara states. Much of the insecurity is affecting mainly Muslim communities in the north of Nigeria. And I think we need to be very clear that insecurity is affecting people across religious, ethnic and geographic lines in Nigeria. We need to support healing and peace building, and that means not fueling narratives that are being used to stoke up further hatred and violence. And I hope that with the Minister we can send a unanimous message of solidarity with all the Nigerian communities struggling in the face of this insecurity. So, Nigeria is a named priority in both the government's integrated review and in the international development strategy. I hope we're going to hear more from the Minister about what fresh work is being done to put that priority into action. What strategic assessment have we made of whether the forms of support within the security partnerships are the right one? Are they at the right scale to make a real difference? I note that the security partnership is expanding to include programming on civilian policing and civilian military cooperation, desperately needed. But when it comes to UK aid, the cuts were brutal. Funding for bilateral Nigeria programmes was cut by more than half last year. So there have been specific requests for more assistance with tackling the drivers of insecurity, and does the department have the resources to meet them? How will we manage the sensitivities of the pre-election period while hopefully ramping up our support for security in Nigeria? How are we working particularly with Niger and Chad on some of the big cross-border drivers? I know the Minister will rightly talk about the work being done as part of the Lake Chad stabilisation strategy, but frankly the geographic scale of this has expanded. It is alarming to read the Security and Defence Partnerships communique from February and see northeastern Nigeria highlighted constantly. I'm sure the Minister will recognise that the security challenges of recent months have primarily been in the northwest and the middle belt, and I hope she'll be able to say a little bit more about what coordinated cross-border work is planned to address the drivers of insecurity. The drivers aren't new, they won't go away overnight, and we have to face the fact that climate heating is creating intense conflicts for dwindling resources like water and fertile land. And this interacts with religious and ethnic differences which mirror the divide between farming communities and often nomadic herders. At the most basic level, people struggling to survive are more vulnerable to recruitment by armed groups, not just terrorists, but bandits. The UK has a role to play in supporting the Nigerian government to provide an effective response. And I believe that we need steady peace building, enabling the state to build public service provision in marginalised areas and, above all, enforcing the law and protecting people. We really have to be conscious of what happened in Guinea, Mali and Burkina Faso and the risk to democracy when security deteriorates. There is promising leadership against insecurity, especially in Niger, and I'd like to hear how we are getting behind those efforts to expand and adapt those more effective approaches. We know that independent, proudly African, human rights respecting, democratic states can provide real security for their people. But we need to support states in demonstrating that against the challenges they face. So surely that's a task. Because if there isn't success in that task, we're likely to see more military coups in the region, more terrorism, more frightful atrocities and more humanitarian disasters, more exploitative interference by Russia. And if that happens, the enormous promise of Nigeria risks being lost, and UK interests will woefully be damaged in the process. So let's work together to stop it.
Thank you. Ms Noakes, it's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And I am really grateful to the Honourable Member for Hendon for securing this debate and to the Honourable Members for the comments that they have made. I'll try to respond as many points as I can. Nigeria is, of course, a priority partner for the United Kingdom. Its success matters. Nigeria is Africa's largest democracy, its largest economy, and it's the highest number of people living in poverty in the continent. And what happens in Nigeria has far-reaching repercussions, particularly, as the Honourable Lady opposite has said, in the region. The region does matter as well. The member for West Ham also mentions the vibrant diaspora that we have in the UK. And indeed, the Nigerian diaspora is one of the largest in the entire United Kingdom, more than 200,000 people. So the government is committed to maintaining a strong partnership with Nigeria, one that furthers the links between our people and delivers our economic, security and development objectives. But as the members here have pointed out so correctly, rising insecurity in Nigeria is a very significant concern, and the country faces multiple and complex challenges, from terrorism in the northeast, intercommunal conflicts and criminal banditry in the northwest and middle belt, violence in the southeast and the southwest, as well as much serious and organised crime. And many of these challenges are long-standing. The causes are complex and varied, and competition over resources, historical grievance and criminality are key drivers, and religion can be a factor. It's notable that in 2021, this was the worst year on record for levels of conflict and for deaths resulting from political violence as well. And I know that the entire House will share my sympathy and my concern for the families and the communities affected. The Honourable Member for Hendon, the Honourable Member for Argyll and Booth and others have asked what our government is doing to support this. So maybe first on the issue of elections, which the Honourable Member for Hendon mentioned. The 2023 elections will be a significant test for Nigerian democracy. The UK government will continue to publicly stress the importance of all actors working together to ensure free, fair and peaceful elections in 2023. And indeed, this is an issue I raise not only with, or is raised with me not only in Nigeria, but in many of my discussions with other African nations as well, the importance of having a peaceful transfer of power in Nigeria. So we are supporting the Electoral Commission to deliver credible elections. We're supporting civil society to encourage women and young people to participate more meaningfully in the election process. And, for example, we're working with the National Peace Committee and a range of civil society partners to promote peaceful elections, and that includes countering devices narratives, countering fake news and disinformation, because that in itself can also drive violence. Then on the issue of our security and defence partnership, it is important to remember that security is of course, the responsibility of the Nigerian government, but we support them in a number of ways, and the UK Security and Defence Partnership with Nigeria is the cornerstone of our bilateral relationship. In January, we in the UK hosted the Nigeria's National Security Advisor for the inaugural dialogue in support of our Security and Defence Partnership, and we committed then more support to help Nigeria tackle its security challenges, including police reform, tackling serious and organised crime and countering terrorism. I discussed the rising insecurity with Nigeria's National Security Advisor during that dialogue. It was a very in-depth dialogue over a number of days. And I also raised these issues with the Nigerian Vice President and the Foreign Minister during my visit to Nigeria in February. The Prime Minister raised insecurity again with President Buhari at the Chogam meeting last month. Whilst we do completely recognise that security challenges are Nigeria's responsibility to resolve, we can and do help them to respond to insecurity and to shared threats, and we also help them to respond in a way that is in compliance with human rights. So that includes delivering accountability and justice to victims of violations and abuses, and to support the Nigerian authorities, we're providing training, technical assistance and advice. The Honourable Member for Hendon again raised the situation in northeast Nigeria, where extremist groups, including Islamic State West Africa and Boko Haram, and the ongoing conflict with them, are having a particularly devastating impact on communities. Both groups continue to target anybody who does not agree with their extremist ideology. The conflicts lasted over a decade, causing over 35,000 deaths, leaving 2 million people internally displaced. It's caused alarming humanitarian crisis. 8 million people living in northeast Nigeria are now in need of life-saving humanitarian assistance. And that is not just limited to Nigeria, it also hurts communities across the wider Lake Chad Basin region, and that then does have implications even more widely. So we take a coordinated and regional approach to supporting Nigeria and its neighbours to address the causes and effects of the conflict. We provide global leadership at the UN Security Council. We're working with others to encourage a regional approach to peace. Through the Regional Stabilisation Facility, we support initiatives which improve security services and economic opportunities for all people in Boko Haram affected areas. Over the last 5 years, we've provided £425 million of humanitarian aid in northeast Nigeria, reaching around 1.5 million vulnerable people, including food aid, malnutrition prevention support, and protection service to about 1.3 million children under the age of 5, as well as pregnant and lactating women and at-risk boys and girls. The member for Hendon also raised the situation in northeast Nigeria, which has also rapidly deteriorated due to banditry, kidnapping and violent crime. Around 14,000 people have been killed in the last decade in the northwest, and that situation is again spilling over into other regions. So we recently launched a project alongside Nigerian stakeholders to tackle crime and banditry and counter illicit financial flows. And we're also using our development budget to support work to build social safety nets for the most vulnerable, including those displaced by conflict and violence in some of the worst affected states. Regarding human trafficking, which again was raised by my honourable friend, between 2017 and 2022, the Home Office Modern Slavery Fund invested just over £6 million in Nigeria in partnership with the International Organisation for Migration and the Nigerian National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking of Persons. This increased capacity to pursue traffickers, secure convictions of traffickers, and supported, we believe, 444 victims of trafficking. The Honourable Member for Hendon also raised kidnappings. These occur across Nigeria. They're carried out by criminal gangs and violent extreme organisations. We do condemn all kidnappings. We call for the release of all those held captive. We're providing mentoring and capacity building support to Nigerian police force units. That is helping them to prevent kidnapping, protect victims and hold those responsible to account. Regarding intercommunal violence, it is again having a devastating effect on these communities, and these conflicts are highly localised, they are varied. And as raised by the Honourable Member for Congleton, who was very wise, it is clear that religious identity can be a factor in instances of violence. In some instances, it can be the main factor. Indeed, in some instances, it is the main factor. But I did discuss this with religious leaders, non-governmental organisations and religious regional governors during my visit to Nigeria in February. And they made it clear that the root causes of these tensions indeed are often complex. And they do include also competition over resources, historical grievances and criminality. So that is why I believe it is right that the UK is supporting local and national peace-building initiatives to tackle intercommunal violence, including through our work with Nigeria's Governors Forum and National Peace Committee. However, the UK absolutely remains resolute in our commitment to defend freedom of religion or belief for all and to promote respect between religious and non-religious communities. We hosted a successful international ministerial conference the week before last, bringing together over 500 delegates from more than 60 countries across the work. And I, again, would like to thank the tireless work that the Honourable Member, my honourable friend from Congleton, does. That conference would not have been the success it was without her work and her role as the envoy for the Prime Minister on the freedom of religion and belief has had very, very far-reaching consequences, and I know that everybody across the House is deeply grateful for her work. At the conference, the Nigerian High Commissioner attended, but also many representatives from across Nigeria, from groups that promote peace building, social justice and interfaith relations. I understand that the conference was incredibly helpful in helping different organisations to listen to those from other countries, discuss their issues, similarity, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and support those networks. So thank you. The Honourable Member for Strangford raised the case of Mubarak Bala. We in the UK government continue to follow Mr Bala's case very closely. I have raised his sentencing with the Nigerian Foreign Minister. We believe that it is the right of individuals to express opinions and that that right is essential in any free and open society. So just to close, I really do welcome the comments of the honourable members today. And please do remember that in spite of the challenges that are faced by Nigeria, it is a country of huge potential. The UK will continue to support a more stable and prosperous future for the country. Our aid is important. It's supported more than 2 million Nigerians to improve their incomes or jobs since 2015. It's supported education in 11 states, reaching over 8 million children since 2009. And indeed, this was something that was specifically raised in my meeting with the regional governors, the importance of education. They absolutely believe that increasing improved stability across some of the very fragile regions that they represented, the education remained key, because the education would unlock the opportunities. So the government remains committed to education. We remain firmly committed to our economic partnership to promote mutual prosperity as well. We will support Nigeria to respond to its responsibility to tackle rising insecurity and do so in a way that conforms with international human rights standards and humanitarian law. We will continue to encourage the Nigerian government to implement long-term solutions that address the root causes of violence and insecurity. That is how, together, we will work towards a safer and more prosperous future for all our countries. And I would encourage all of us present today and all of those with Nigerian diaspora living in our own constituencies to again call for peace in Nigeria, especially through the election process next year. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for her comments, particularly to congratulate the wealth of experience and knowledge that I've heard here today. But particularly I have to thank Abedoyan and his team for allowing me to understand a very complex issue, even though I must apologise to them for mangling some of the names. But to the Honourable Member for Strangford, I would say, based upon his comments, I think the asymmetry of some of the attacks that we've seen with the weaponry and the frequency now appear to constitute an ethno-religious cleansing. And I don't say that lightly, as someone who represents many constituents who have direct experience of the Holocaust. I'm very concerning and guarded about using such language. But I'm also very pleased that the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religious Belief, the member for Congleton, was able to come along today, and very pleased that her co-chairman, David Burrows, who's not here in himself, but has given me an update throughout the debate. And he has actually visited Nigeria himself, and he has concluded that it is on the brink of crisis. But I'm sure the Honourable Member for Congleton would agree with me that the arming of certain groups, it's certainly very clear that this is an organisation and individuals who are receiving weaponry from outside of the country. Just in July, a Nigerian Air Force Alpha jet was downed by what was termed as a non-state actor. But clearly, those weapons came from outside of the country. The Honourable Member for Argyll and Bute gave his experience of visiting Nigeria, and it shows really the amalgamation of these groups to come forward into a terrorist group is a very real threat to the country. If he was not able to actually travel from outside of the cities that he was visiting, we all know that something is very wrong, and his issue of support for the country is one that is necessary for everyone. The Honourable Member for West Ham raised the issue of the ODA, and I think that is very important. It's always been my view that we should use the ODA. International development is not a charity, but we should allow spending to assist countries to prosper, and it's in our own security and economic interest to do so. But the Minister did actually cover a large range of issues, and I'm grateful for that. I will reflect upon what she has said, as I don't have the time available to me to go any further. But I'd like to thank you, Ms Noakes, for this debate this afternoon.